The night dragged on, and though the ominous presence that had haunted the room had retreated, the air was still thick with tension. I picked up the recorder and pressed play, listening to my own voice echo from hours before. Every word stirred fresh memories of the confrontation, the shadowy figure that nearly swallowed my courage, and Laura's desperate, determined gaze. Then something caught my attention, a faint rustling of paper from the corner of the room. I glanced at the symbol I'd sketched, now just an inert drawing, and noticed something underneath. A loose, time-worn sheet I didn't recall seeing before. Cautiously, I picked it up. It was a letter written by hand, the penmanship meticulous, each letter sharp and deliberate. The name signed at the bottom made my pulse quicken. Dr. James Mitchell. If you're reading this, you've already seen the veil shift. The shadows watching are more than reflections. They are the essence of the unknown, and once you see them, they always know where you are. But there's something few understand. As they observe, you too can learn to observe them. And when that happens, the balance can change. The letter continued with notes about his experiments, pointing to a specific place, an abandoned building called the Finch Observatory, situated outside the city, where inexplicable phenomena were strongest and shadows most tangible. Mitchell described his last visit before he vanished. What I saw was not just a shadow but a doorway, a meeting point between our reality and the other. Exhaustion gave way to an urgency I couldn't shake. If Mitchell had been right, if I could find proof at the Finch Observatory, I might understand more about these entities. The storm outside was waning, but the night still held that oppressive weight, as if the very air knew something significant was about to unfold. I took one last look through the window at the empty street below. The shadows cast by lampposts and trees appeared ordinary, yet I knew they were there. "Time to turn the tables," I murmured, closing the office door and stepping into the darkness. The truth is, there is no safe place. What we think we know is just a curtain, a fragile barrier between what we believe to be reality and what sustains it. The words seemed to echo what I felt, a bridge between rationality and terror. As I read, I noticed a pattern. Marcus mentioned a symbol, a mark that appeared in ancient accounts and that he described as a focus of attraction, a link between victims and the entity that haunted them. I took a blank sheet of paper and sketched the symbol from his descriptions, a circle with undulating lines that intertwined, almost like waves on a dark surface. A chill ran down my spine, and the light in the office seemed to waver for a moment. My eyes fixed on the reflection in the window. For an instant, I saw a hazy outline, a shadow that moved faster than my eyes could follow. Laura stood in the doorway, her eyes wide and her face pale. She was shaking, and her lips were blue, as if she had been out in the cold for too long. "Come in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She flinched as she stepped over the threshold, looking back as if she feared something was following her. "Dr. Vale, they've manifested more. Not just shadows, but shapes that speak, that scream." She sat across from me, her eyes teary and lost. I told her about the symbol I'd found in Marcus's notes. Her eyes widened as I drew it on the paper. I've seen this. On the walls, in my dreams." The air around us grew heavier, and the temperature dropped dramatically. I looked around and saw that the shadows on the walls were no longer passive. They seemed to move, changing shape and coming closer. "Laura, you have to trust me. We need to confront them, understand the reason for this connection, not run away, but observe, without fear." She nodded, though the doubt and dread were clear on her face. The idea of confronting the shadows, of facing something that seemed to play with the boundaries of reality, was more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. But if there was a chance to break the cycle and protect Laura and myself, it had to be now. In the center of the room, I placed the symbol drawn on paper, lighting candles around it. Laura watched me silently, her eyes still wide, but with a determined glow of acceptance. I'm going to ask you to describe exactly what it feels like when they appear, I said, my voice low but firm. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling unevenly. It's as if they're part of the darkness, but conscious. They sense my presence and wait for a moment of weakness to move. As she spoke, I felt a shift in the air. The symbol seemed to pulse, casting a faint shadow of its own, as if responding to the energy filling the room. The candlelight flickered, and for a moment, the shadow of a tall, distorted figure loomed on the far wall, still but powerful. Its form had no face, but an intense, oppressive presence. "We hear you, Alex Vale," a guttural voice reverberated, echoing in our thoughts rather than echoing in the air. I glanced at Laura, who stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the figure. The presence seemed to study us, as if gauging our courage or our sanity. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. Remembering Dr. Helena Mark's theory, they feed on fear, but are drawn to observation. Perhaps by looking, we can understand, and, who knows, control. I opened my eyes and stared at the shadow, feeling a mixture of dread and an unknown force. "You do not control the darkness, but you know it," I whispered, testing my theory. The figure moved, a slight tremor, as if reacting to the provocation. Laura, still motionless, began to mumble something incoherent, tears streaming down her face. The shadow on the wall seemed to duplicate itself, other shapes appearing in corners of the room, flowing and connecting as if they shared a collective mind. The symbol on the paper glowed for an instant, and then darkened, like a flame that is extinguished.
"Your thoughts are the key."
The guttural voice sounded again, this time clearer, like a unison chorus of shadows. Time seemed to stop, each second stretching out in an endless thread. I stared into the darkness and, in an act of defiance, remembered the days when I had faced my own doubts. Those moments of loneliness and despair that had shaped me. The voice of the shadows trembled, as if a fraction of me had destabilized them. Laura, who had been trembling before, now looked at me with a new glow in her eyes, as if, for a moment, she understood that fear was the chain that bound us to this macabre dance. "Alex, we must not fear." The shadows began to shrink, to writhe, and one by one, they disappeared into the corners of the room, until only the ordinary darkness of the night remained. The oppressive weight that had dominated the room began to dissipate, giving way to an unsettling emptiness. Laura, still shaking, wiped away the tears that were streaming down her face, her eyes meeting mine with a gleam of disbelief and relief. "Did we make it?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I didn't know how to answer. The symbol in the center of the room was intact, but now it seemed only a lifeless drawing, devoid of the strange pulse of before. We sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the sound of the rain turning into a soft tapping on the windows. "The shadows haven't completely disappeared," I murmured, looking around. "They still watch, but they've retreated. Maybe they sensed our determination. Maybe they're still waiting for the chance to return." Laura nodded, the tension in her face softening. I knew the battle we had just faced was just a chapter. The shadows had receded, but their presence would never be eradicated. They were part of what made us human, feeding on our fears and uncertainties, but also mirroring our strength. As I walked her out, I felt a new realization taking shape. The shadows didn't just haunt us. They challenged us to face what we had avoided in ourselves. The supernatural and the psychological were connected in an intricate web of perception and belief. "You're going to keep going, aren't you?" Laura asked, pausing for a moment in the doorway. I smiled slightly, my expression weary but resolute. "I can't ignore that. There is so much more to understand, and now I know I am not alone." She smiled back, a glimmer of hope amidst the weariness, and then, without another word, she was gone, disappearing into the night that still carried traces of rain. The shadows that surround us are not always enemies. Sometimes they are the pieces of ourselves we fear to face, hidden in the darkest corners of our minds. But when challenged, we find an essential truth. Fear is a choice, and strength is a consequence. This is only the first part of a long journey. The answers are closer, but so are the questions. And in the shadows, they are still there, waiting. The early morning was approaching, and although the dark presence that had previously haunted the room had receded, the air still carried a palpable tension. I picked up the recorder and pressed play, hearing my own voice echo from hours before. Each word brought back fresh memories of the confrontation, the shadowy figure that had nearly swallowed my courage, and Laura's desperate but determined gaze. Suddenly, something caught my attention, a faint rustling of paper coming from the corner of the room. I looked at the symbol I had drawn, now just a lifeless drawing, and realized there was something beneath it. A loose sheet of paper, yellowed with age, that I didn't remember seeing before. I picked it up carefully. It was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was meticulous, the letters angular and precise. The name signed at the bottom made my heart race, Dr. James Mitchell. If you are reading this, it means you have looked into the veil and seen it move. The shadows that watch are more than reflections. They are the essence of the unknown, and once you see them, they always know where you are. But there is something few understand. Just as they watch, you can learn to watch them too. And when that happens, the balance can shift. The letter went on to detail experiments he had performed, mentioning a specific location, an abandoned building called the Finch Observatory, located outside the city, where unexplained phenomena were strongest and the shadows were most tangible. Mitchell described his last visit before he disappeared. What I saw there was not just a shadow, but a door, an entrance to the meeting point between our reality and the other. Exhaustion melted into a sharp, unsettling energy. If Mitchell was right, if there really was evidence hidden at Finch Observatory, this could be the key to finally understanding these entities. Outside, the storm had settled, but an unnatural weight clung to the air, as if the night itself anticipated something critical, something inevitable. Before leaving, I cast a final glance out the window. The street lay empty, drenched in the cold glow of streetlights, shadows stretching from tree branches and lampposts. They looked the same as always, but now I knew. They were there, lingering at the edges, silent sentinels, watching, waiting. The Finch Observatory was a place known for legends and stories of disappearances, but I had never had any reason to connect these events to the phenomena I was investigating until now. It was a forgotten building, with weathered bricks and windows that looked like slits of watching eyes. It had always seemed more like a monument to abandonment than a portal to the unknown. The city streets were deserted as I drove away from the center, toward the field where the Finch Observatory stood. The city lights faded away, and the darkness of the road took over, interrupted only by the intermittent glow of headlights. My mind was in a whirlwind, replaying everything I had read in Dr. Mitchell's letter. I parked the car and got out, the air feeling colder and thicker than before. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional sound of the wind blowing through the trees and the rustling of dry leaves. The observatory stood in front of me, imposing and covered in vines. It looked more like a fortress that guarded ancient secrets. "Are you ready to see what lies beyond the veil, Alex?" I asked myself, my voice swallowed by the surroundings. The last 2 or 3 days have been a blur of intense confusion, a maze of challenges and discoveries that have tested every edge of my sanity. The first sign that something was changing was that unmistakable feeling that I was getting close to something monumental. It's as if the place sucks the soul out, leaving only an empty body, like a receptacle for fear itself. Knowing this, I still can't help myself. There's something in me, an obsession with discovery, that drives me to keep going, to delve deeper into the mystery. The days are starting to bleed together, a haze of challenges and chilling discoveries that have pushed my mind to its absolute edge. Each revelation tightens its grip, pulling me deeper into the unknown. This unshakable feeling grows a dark, magnetic pull, a certainty that I'm close to something profound. Yet, with every answer comes an unsettling truth. Each step I take blurs the line between my world and theirs. Dr. Mitchell's letter led me here, to the door of Finch Observatory. Everyone who ventured inside before me either vanished or returned broken, consumed by some force that strips them of sanity or life itself. The walls here seem to breathe, shadows twisting as if alive, mirroring my fear back at me. Yet, there's a drive in me I can't ignore, a relentless thirst for the unknown that only strengthens with each encounter, dragging me forward, even as each step chips away at my very essence. For now, the true descent into the heart of this place awaits. What I've seen so far is only the beginning. The real nightmare lies beyond that threshold. Have you ever felt a pull towards something unexplainable? A fascination that defies reason, like staring into an abyss and feeling it stare back? If you, too, are drawn to the mysteries at the edge of reality, I want to hear your stories, your brushes with the unknown. Perhaps, together, we can begin to unravel the shadows that haunt our world and ourselves.
Ja, je bent goed zoals je bent. Rustig.